Hi. This is about IIIF AV. Why do we want IIIF AV? I think after seeing this morning's explanation of what IIIF can do for images, the answers to this should really be obvious. And many of you will have audio-visual collections as well as image-based collections of digitized material. And if you could do everything you saw this morning and this afternoon for your AV collections that you can already do via IIIF for your text and image-based collections, then that would be really cool. So how do we get there? How do we get to IIIF AV? We want to be able to have manifests for our multimedia resources as well as our books and paintings, and inherit the same mechanisms for linking and metadata and search and access control that we already have. So in one way, we can actually already do this because you can annotate a video or an audio file onto a canvas. In fact, the very first time I ever saw Mirador version 1, there's a demo of annotating a video onto a canvas. And you can already do this, but that only works for like one simple kind of use case of just playing a video. And the kind of requirements that we have to give us equivalent rich functionality to the stuff we were seeing today requires a lot more than that. So what we've been doing over the last year or so is doing some extensive use case gathering from many institutions. And I was going to talk about the British Library in particular, because the British Library currently has a Save Our Sounds program, which is a Heritage Lottery-funded program to preserve a kind of emergency preservation of the material that's about to disappear due to just degradation of the media or the fact that it's hard to buy Betamax video recorders and players and various other formats. And so kind of the preservation of the nation's sound heritage is kind of the focus of this. But in order to disseminate that material and make it publicly shareable, the British Library really need IIIF AV now rather than wait a few years for a IIIF AV spec to materialize and then convert everything into that. So can we have IIIF AV now, please? So the British Library are a major driver of this. And obviously, you can see here wax cylinders and very acetate discs and all sorts of other media. And just going into kind of use cases, we're not talking about just simply kind of like a kind of file player, AV player. We need to kind of somehow convey the archive item. So imagine we were trying to describe the White Album as a IIIF resource. The fact is we have the sound files. Maybe we digitized this and just took one track per side. But we've got lots of metadata about where the individual songs stop and start. We've taken images of the gatefold sleeve and the liner notes and the pictures of the Beatles that you get in the White Album. So there's a combination of metadata here and a combination of media, because there's images and there's audio and there's potentially text and digitized OCR text, and maybe there's transcripts of the songs with the timings of the words. And we have all sorts of other things like albums of 78s or field recordings or these cassettes which are from the archives of Lou Reed, which would be really cool to listen to. And then we have from the kind of world of moving images, we have these use cases. Some of these come from the BFI, some come from other places. So presenting a restoration of a film, trying to put together the Magnificent Ambersons, Orson Welles' film, that various bits of it are missing, but you've got screenplays and production stills and various bits of text that you could combine. Queen Victoria's Jubilee Procession, there's lots of film of this, but you can kind of reassemble that on a timeline. There's a use case from Stanford here. They have a no theatre use case where they have lots and lots of multi-camera angles and richly annotated performances of no theatre, and want to kind of represent that in a IIIF manifest. And you can see where this is going. Kind of the common use case is, say, a performance of an opera. Here's an opera set in Rome, suitably. We have maybe the fact that this is an archival item on 2 CDs, and we want to somehow represent both the archival item and the content on it. So what do we need to do all this kind of stuff? We've got the Presentation API already. That's our kind of model for putting a digital surrogate of an object on the web. And we've also got the Image API to give us pixels. Now, one kind of stake in the ground we probably need to make is that there is no kind of separate Presentation API for AV alongside the one we already have, because that would kind of prevent us having mixed media manifests, and that would be a bad idea. So there's kind of a given is that there's only one Presentation API. But is there a kind of an AV API like the Image API? And that was the kind of starting point of the work. You can imagine a service that, rather than returning pixels, returns you bit streams of audio and video in response to different parameterized queries, in the same way that you can slot the size, the region, the rotation, and etc. into the image API query. You can imagine extending that, adding a few more parameters, and inserting things like video formats, the time period that you want extracted. But the thing is, that's all very well, and there are some really compelling use cases that require that, but there are far more compelling and immediate use cases that don't require that. And the fact is, for images, which are kind of one of the first things to appear on the web, the technical solution that browsers have taken is completely different for AV. And there are many different ways of doing what we currently need image servers to do for images that we don't need to do for simple use cases for AV, because we have things like byte range requests and adaptive bitrate formats like MPEG-. These are solved problems. We don't need to reinvent them. And there's a great blog post by Jason Ronaldo about the various client-side techniques we can use to do these kind of things. So although Bitstream API, like the image API, is a real thing and something to be looked at, it's not the focus of attention right now. So if we go back to the Presentation API, we have this concept of annotating our content onto the canvas, including the images and including all the other stuff. And really, the shared canvas is how we make video work. We annotate video onto the canvas. We annotate time-based media onto the canvas. And as I said, we can already do this today, but we can only do it simply by annotating one video onto the canvas for the entire extent of the canvas, because there's no time dimension. So what we need to do to make IIIF AV work primarily with time-based media is add time to the canvas. So at the moment, the canvas is this two-dimensional space in which our content is annotated. We need to add a time dimension so that there is a duration to this space as well, and we can insert that content into particular points, not only spatially, but temporally. And we can, you can see the bit highlighted in yellow there shows you that this particular annotation, which may be itself a piece of video or an audio, the subtitles or captions or whatever, is annotating the canvas not only at this position, but at this particular time, and should appear at one time and stop at another time. And similarly, some of the audio-only use cases require a canvas that simply doesn't have a width and a height, because there's nothing you can do with it. It's just a duration only, and you're annotating audio into a temporal dimension only. Another thing we're looking at doing with Presentation 3, which is kind of where this is going, we're kind of evolving the requirements for AV into what the Presentation API needs to do to support this, which is therefore forms recommendations for Presentation 3, is kind of dethrone the special privileged role that images have currently in the Presentation API. So in version 2 of the Presentation API, if you look at what annotates a canvas, all the content for a particular canvas, you have this property called images, where all the image annotations live, and they live in line in the manifest. And then you have another property called other content, where everything else lives, all your text transcriptions and any other content, that, audio, video content, whatever that's annotating the canvas. In Presentation 3, because there's no particular reason why images should be special and everything else has to live outside the manifest, that's simplified down to just this idea of having content. And it's up to you what you put in the manifest and what you put external to the manifest. That content property is just lists of annotation lists, some of which can be rendered in line. That's your kind of showcase content, the videos themselves, and some of which you would still reference externally, such as transcriptions and other text. So what we've been doing as well is trying to model all our use cases that we've captured as test fixtures. And I won't go into these in any great detail, but they're available on that link. And many of the British Library and BFI and other people's use cases that have been contributed on GitHub are there modeled as candidate kind of Presentation 3 models. And this one isn't one of them. This is one I've just done to kind of sanity check. But you can see here that we've an annotation list that has time dimensions in it simply kind of ends up rendering content not just in space but in time as well. So here, it's a really simple example. I'm just taking bits of text, bits of images, and also video resources, and just annotating them onto the canvas at particular times. Kind of like a PowerPoint slide, even more so than the kind of usual analogy to a PowerPoint slide. And in fact, next year, every single presentation has to be done in IIIF AV, otherwise it's not allowed. But okay, there are a number of technical challenges with this approach, because what we saw there was just a quick mock-up. But if you have any kind of bandwidth issues or any kind of problems of that nature, that becomes a complete car crash and just doesn't work. So we have this, in order to kind of synchronize content on a canvas with a temporal dimension, we need to handle some tricky issues with timing of media on the web. And we also need to introduce this notion that there is a canvas clock. The idea that just as you could control your position on the canvas spatially by panning and zooming, you need to be able to control your position in the content temporally by being in charge of this evolving timeline. So this is not IIIF AV. This is an application called FrameTrail, which the creator of which demoed on the IIIF AV call a few weeks ago. But it kind of solves this problem, because here you can see there are videos annotated onto the canvas, and I'm controlling the scrubbing bar at the bottom and moving around in time. And so just kind of getting this working in IIIF world is pretty much kind of what we need as a starting point. So what we're going to do next is come back to bitstream APIs if we need them. We need implementations, so anyone who wants to try and implement our test fixtures, please do so. And also use AV as a proving ground for the Presentation API 3. Now, this is called AV and Beyond, so I've been talking about AV most of the time because AV is fundamentally the thing we're looking at now. But there's a lot of interest in 3D use cases and the potential of what we do with 3D, because there are all sorts of obvious use cases about recombining objects in 3D. And there is a 3D Slack channel, and there are lots of community members who are interested in 3D. But AV will be done first, and then 3D will come in later. But just to give you a taster, so Ed has been working on 3D in the UV, and many of you will have seen this demo. This is one of Stanford's vertebrae. It's not one of Stu's vertebrae, I don't think, but I'm not. but this isn't yet any kind of IIIF thing, but it shows you the way that this can go, and it's a kind of people are interested in this stuff, and they want 3D in IIIF as well. But for now, AV is kind of ongoing, and the real focus is on implementations, and we have these various places, IIIF Discuss, obviously, the AV Technical Specification Group call, and Slack and GitHub, obviously, are places where this activity can be tracked and observed. And that's IIIF AV and beyond.